I'm not going to go through the entire ordinance, but what I wanted this discussion to be centered around is, of course, I think most people here have either thumbed through or is familiar with the ordinance itself. So this is regarding short-term vacation rentals, and just to dispel any, I don't want to say misinformation, but just information that might not be as accurate, or maybe it's missing the intent of what the county was trying to do. The discussion about short-term vacation rentals today is regarding single-family homes being converted to a rental that would be promoted on a hosting platform that'll be rented out for less than 30 days to the transient population, as that's defined, I think, in state law. So, with that being said, I know short-term rentals are thrown around and they're used as a broad term to describe the hotel industry, to describe other types of hospitality industries that also allow for the rental of space for less than 30 days. All right, so as I mentioned previously, this is in draft form. This is technically the second draft. We are continuously looking at all of the valid points that were brought up during public comment at the last workshop. In addition, any of the comments that we've received either via phone or online, we're taking those and we're incorporating that into the ordinance as well. And so just be on the lookout for any of the email blasts that we'll be sending out. In addition, if you periodically check the website, we'll be also putting the draft versions there as well. The most current draft is that's where you can find it as well. Some of the overall themes, some of the recurring points that we heard at the Planning Commission workshop, I want to just go over those, and of course I want to open this all for a discussion and dialogue. Just we can have that discussion, and I'll also be giving out my contact information as well, so anybody can give me a call. So I know one big item that was discussed at the workshop was grandfathering. That is mentioned in the ordinance itself. However, it's not called grandfathering, but the purpose moving forward is we're going to take a look at that policy in here. We'll change it and we'll label it as grandfathering, just so it's a common terminology for anybody that's looking at the ordinance, because the purpose of the ordinance would be for anybody to pick it up and read it and understand exactly what we're trying to convey to them. So the purpose of the grandfathering is that if you are a legally operating short-term rental prior to the effective date of the ordinance, then you would be allowed to continue operating as a legal rental. That's the intent of the grandfathering clause that we're going to be putting into the ordinance. Yes, ma'am.
How long? Is that like 1 year till the next application, or is that going to go till the property's sold? How is that going to work?
So as of right now, we do, in the ordinance, we are stating that a short-term rental permit would be required. That's when the ordinance becomes effective. Right now, a short-term rental is only required to obtain a business license to start operating. And so the business license is required to be renewed on an annual basis. And so if the business license is renewed on an annual basis and the owner and operator doesn't allow the business license to lapse, then you would still be within that grandfathered status. I'd love to stay here all day, but unfortunately I don't have all day. But the discussion is well worth it. Of course, we're going to have future discussions about this at different workshops, things like that. But to address the question specifically, occupancy limits did come up at the Planning Commission meeting, and so did the discussion about what can be rented out as a short-term rental. At the workshop, we heard a lot of public comment about the inherent difference of the structures that are out here used as residential units versus your typical single-family home based off of the amount of bedrooms out there. There's differences up here because they're just conversions of old cabins and things like that, so there's lofts and there's things like that could enhance the occupancy of the structure to boost the revenue, to boost the TOT, things like that. And so what I've heard from our discussions internally at the county is that a lot of these homes, of course, they have been existing and they have infrastructure needs that are perhaps deficient or perhaps can't sustain an occupancy limit of what's being proposed if it were to be a short-term rental. And so that's the concern of the county as of right now. To get more specific, I'd have to go and have that discussion, the further discussion with the environmental health department there, but I do know that is the concern.
So logic is health and safety
Right.
because of the septic. So we're in the process of compiling data for you guys. We've got a lot of data to pull from tens of thousands of reservations where we can show you occupancy versus how many times we've had problems with the septic and exactly what those problems were with the septic. And I'm pretty confident that 100% of the time, they're usually roots in the line or the failure of a leach line because a diaper was flushed or something that has zero to do with capacity. And so the question is, if we can present that kind of data, are you guys open to a conversation of, all right, how can we work with this? What if we get the septic's pumped every year or approve that? Like there are other things we can do where when a home is set up to sleep, the occupancy, then it becomes fire safety is the next
Right.
thing. And so then we can just, that's all doable.
Specific to homes that are still on an axle. Just as an example, a tiny home that could be easily transferable via trailer and it has a DMV number. That was the intent of incorporating that into a category of it won't be allowed because of the complications with getting it certified via the building code. Now, to talk about accessory dwelling units by state law are not permitted to be rented for less than 30 days. And so,
Only
as
after 2020.
I'm
If
sorry?
they're, only if they're built after 2020.
I'm sorry, Larry?
Lenny.
Lenny, I'm sorry. To your point, how we define what the accessory dwelling unit is if you apply for that type of construction specifically, because there are some advantages you get building an ADU versus building, let's say, a comparable residential dwelling unit of similar size and general floor plan and makeup, right? There's a potential for the reduction of impact fees, there's leniencies on development standards, things like that. And so that would categorize whatever you're building. If you apply for an ADU, you can get the ADU, but there's also limitations by state law whether or not you can rent that out for 30 days or for less than 30 days.
So what about the ADUs that are built prior to 2020?
I would have to take a closer look at that because I know within the last 5 years there had been 8 or 9 ADU-centric laws that have gone in place. Last time I checked, it just flatly stated that ADUs cannot be rented for less than 30 days, and it didn't have a specific timer on when older units could be used for that purpose, so I would just have to take another look at that.
We'd really appreciate if when you look at that, if you could send us that data. It's
Sure.
because we're not trained in that. Like, from my research in 2023, they changed it to where it was the 2020 law, but it's hard for me to get that accurate data. And then the next question is, if the property is a legal duplex, are we gonna be allowed to get 2 TOTs, or are we still sticking to the 1 TOT for APN? And are you open to that conversation?
We're absolutely open to the conversation. That's one of the keynotes that I took away from the Planning Commission workshop was the edit or the revision to the overall amount of short-term rentals that are allowed per property.
Yes, this is
So-
a good point.
That's, right now it's drafted as 1 per parcel, and I know how that can be restrictive, and the parcelization of a larger property, it's not financially feasible for some people, and the process is very unknown, and it's a process to go through, and so we understand that, and we're taking a look at that.
So to help us, what is the county's concern to only have the 1 TOT for APN? Like, what data are you looking for to help us?
We do know, so we based our ordinance, the drafting of the ordinance, off of other neighboring jurisdictions of similar like geography, things of that nature, to give us a basis. We do know that many jurisdictions are requiring that you can have a certain amount of total short-term rentals allowed in the county or maybe in certain areas where there's a high concentration. We took that into account and we did not see that as being reasonable for a county-wide approach, but we kept in the one per parcel as a mechanism to help manage the growth of that. So as a part of that, we're still obviously open to the discussion. I think the example came up of some investors were looking to purchase the additional 70 acres next to the 30 acres that they already had. And that would be 100 total acres where they would be able only to have 2 short-term rentals. And so we're taking a look at how we can make it more reasonable.